Hungary, and has had quite a life. And so we're so pleased that he's going to talk about his journey and where he is now. So thank you and welcome.
Well, thank you very much. This is sort of off the cuff. I really thought a little bit about it, but I know a lot of this started 25 years ago when I was asked to give a sort of talk about the journey in the church, and it was pretty well received. It was a pretty emotional talk at the time. I was probably 35 years old. We just moved to the area, and I was pretty optimistic. And I did have a pretty good journey there at the time, and I remember the talk pretty much, but I do remember a lot saying as I was told, which is really sort of the theme of my talk today. That story for me, I have no reason to be emotional, but that story for me is really just a story. I mean, as you described in it, it was a harrowing event, and it was really harrowing for my family, not so much for me. I was 1 year old, I was coddled in a blanket, and I was taken out. The reason I'm emotional is not really because of the story, it's because I feel like that story was somewhat of a cheat. For all the years that I've used that story, it's gotten a little bit old. Yes, I was 1 year old. I came out. I was brought to this country. Got a lot of opportunities. But again, it wasn't harrowing for me. When I was in 5th grade, I wrote the story, and I got a nice award for it. 7th grade, I wrote the story again. Got another good award for it. When I applied to colleges, it was particularly helpful. I actually had 440 on my SATs, in my English SATs. I grew up in this country. I went to educated here all my years. I did better in math. Yet that story helped me get into Princeton, Harvard, and Yale. They appreciated that story. It was only a story for me. My girls, who were much smarter than me, both did much better on the SATs, didn't have that story and struggled a little bit more. So, the first time I met my wife, the story got in there pretty quick. She loved that story. Even all the time, that story kept coming back and back, and it was a great story. And this country loved that story. So what was the story? Well, the story was that my parents grew up in Hungary. During World War II, Hungary was involved on the wrong side of the war. After the war, due to a lot of different issues, the communists came in. Communists controlled Hungary for many, many years. Really was a very cruel regime. My parents were on the wrong side of that. They fought very hard to sort of get freedom in Hungary. In 1956, for different reasons, the Hungarian Revolution broke out. My father was very high up involved in that Hungarian Revolution. If he would have stayed, he would have been put in jail, maybe murdered, maybe executed. Many of his friends did stay. He actually, at the time, had already lost his job. He was an attorney. And he was out of the country when the revolution broke. He was actually in Albania. He heard of the revolution through the radios, and there's a story that he came across the mountains on a goat, a goat herder, to get back to Budapest to be there during the revolution. He was very involved in that revolution. He was in the buildings when the students and the farmers and the workers took over. And for a week, in my mother, in his mind, was one of the greatest weeks of their life. And then they got crushed. And we know historically historically, many people lived through that. And they had no choice whether to stay or leave. They packed up their bags and we left. Again, I was coddled in a blanket. My part of the story is I got put to sleep with sleeping pills, and that's how come I didn't cry. We walked across the bridge at Andau, which is a very famous book. It was all blown up. Hungarian soldiers, or the remnant of what the Hungarian army was, let us come across that border. We got to Austria with open arms. The entire Austrian country was welcoming us. There were refugee camps set up. Again, my part of the story is because I was a little one-year-old running around, we were one of the first 5,000 to actually come to the United States. We came to the United States, again, warmly welcomed into Newark, New Jersey, and there was an incredible refugee effort set up in the United States. We were sent out to Ohio, to a church, and that church took us over. Both my father and my mother, very well educated, had no jobs. We were living in near slum. My dad worked for General Motors, mopping up the floors. My mother worked for some refrigerator company at night, putting that little rubber thing that when the refrigerator's closed on all night long. And then they sort of, again, their story is really remarkably, my dad went back to school. He got an equivalent of a bachelor's degree. Then he came, my mother worked at night, took care of me. My brother is 7 years old, also had a huge sort of job to raise me, because again, I was just a little kid running around. And they did an incredible job. They moved to New York City where my dad got a chemistry degree. He always tells a story that he didn't become a lawyer because he didn't know the language. So he learned chemistry and he became a pretty successful chemist. He had like 100 patents in his name. Again, that's sort of his story. My mother went back to school and became a chemist also, and worked all her life, and that's her story. My brother and me also were very lucky. We, both of us got very good educations. My brother and I both were very privileged to go to Princeton. He became a lawyer, and I became a physician. But again, it's interesting that the country loved that story. Over and over again. But now there's a lot of news stories. There's equal. It was just yesterday I was talking to my conservative friends who were talking about this whole problem that we're having now, and talked about how we should get rid of all the Muslims, and are sort of on Donald Trump's bandwagon. And I don't know if you even realize, I'm a refugee. What if they had done that to me? And I was silent. It was hard for me to argue and fight back. It's a difficult time we're going through. But I didn't have a herring. I was coddled. But it's a difficult time now for me, because I am, people don't think of me as a refugee. I mean, I grew up here. I'm 60 years old now. I've lived here for 59 years. So, nobody thinks of me as a refugee or an immigrant. Hungary's in the news all the time now because of all the refugees going through that country. And when we were there, they were trying to keep us in there. They were putting fences up, they were putting walls up to make sure we wouldn't leave. And now we're talking about fences and walls for people not to get in. My wife will tell you I'm sort of a crybaby. And it's been a little hard for me. I mean, it's I want to fight for I want to argue the right side, but it's a little bit hard sometimes because these times we're going through are very emotional, very difficult. I sort of understand the fears. I understand what everybody's going through. But, if this country didn't like my story, I wouldn't be And yeah, I've been pretty successful. You know, I obviously had a role in it, but that story, which probably until I told it here at the age of 36, opened up a lot of doors for me. I stopped telling that story after that age. I don't really tell it that often anymore. It is only a story. I start telling the stories of my children, my family. My dad has died. My mom is not who she was. That story is, like I said, getting old. But I do think it's an important time for people to understand that there are harrowing stories, and a lot of people are going through those now. It's a different refugee story. It's a different problem. People are escaping much more cruel and ruthless situations, much more difficult situations. And I'm not so sure that their stories are going to open the doors that my story opened for me. I hope they will. I hope our country rises above some of our difficult times right now. Again, their stories are important to them. They are all obviously I wish for them to have all the same opportunities that I did. I truly hope, and I don't want this to be too political, but I do hope all the things that my father preached for all the years he was alive, all the greatness of this country, all the opportunities and all the doors that were open, will continue to be true in this country, because that's all of us have some. We're all immigrants to some level, whether it's one generation, two generations, or three generations. But I do understand the fears, and again, it's a difficult time. I mean, we're going through things that I think we could have never maybe even expected 25 years ago. But I think it's so important, and I hope and pray. When I gave this story 25 years ago, I was praying for the heart to start beating. I don't know if you remember that, but doing a transplant. But now I pray for my kids and our future kids, and that we can get through these harrowing times. And the really harrowing times of what our country and our world is going through right now. But it so hit home to me, actually, yesterday when friends of mine were saying things that were really difficult for me to listen to. I mean, to the point where they probably totally forgot that I was an immigrant. I'm a first generation refugee. That the doors were widely open. So that's where we get to today, and with that, I wanted to also change that living in the last 25 years, life wasn't always perfect. After that talk where I gave 25 years ago, I've been through 4 jobs. I've done what I would call pretty incredible work in each one of them, yet dismissed for different reasons, different political reasons, different corporate reasons, and my wife in each one of these had to make big decisions. We 4 times thought about leaving and moving, but each time decided that we're going to stay with roots, that these are our roots, that we don't want to leave the community, we don't want to put all our eggs in one basket. So after my first job, which was Newark Beth Israel, where I created a transplant program and built it up from nothing, and because of a sort of corporate takeover, and what I'm trying to say here is it's the same for everybody. I'm no longer, the story doesn't play anymore. Now I'm part of this culture, and this world, and this day in and day out. The story didn't play anymore. It was, now we have a new CEO, and we have a new chief of heart surgery. He wants to bring in a young guy. We don't care that you built this up. Blah, blah, blah. We're going to bring in a younger guy. And I wasn't even that old then yet. I didn't know if I threatened him or whatever. So then I left Newark because they offered me to stay, and the day I left there, which was 2000, my story was, from a working point of view, was a traveling salesman. I mean, I went from Newark to Westchester because they wanted to start a heart transplant program. My cardiac career really is sort of two careers. Initially, I was all about heart transplant. I happened to train at Columbia Presbyterian where they did a lot of heart transplant. And again, partly I trained there because of my story. They liked my story too. And then because we were all doing heart transplant, that was my story for a while. I mean, everywhere I went, I was the heart transplant surgeon. I went to Westchester to start a heart transplant program, and but we made the decision not to move, which was a great decision because Wendy always says I'm the hare and she's the turtle. The two of us have been able to keep it all going for a lot of reasons, but it's been not easy on our family. I've been all over because of that. At Westchester, I was able to live at home and I commuted. And after being there for 3 or 4 years, Westchester went sort of belly up, had a lot of problems. Again, a big corporate takeover, and sure enough, I'm in their office knocking on their door and they're saying, well, we're changing things again. And I'm back out on the street temporarily. Fortunately enough, Albany Medical, which was a little farther away, had just had a huge sort of turnaround in heart transplant. Their program got shut down and they were hoping that somebody would come and resuscitate it. So we made the decision. Now Catherine, my second daughter, was I think an 8th grader. And it was a pretty difficult decision. Now I'd have to live away from home, and so we moved up there. And I moved up there, but again, we made the decision to stay with our roots, let Catherine finish her schooling here, and that I'd commute and come home on the weekends. And we made it work. It was not easy. I literally, because I wanted to see Catherine, at times commuted to Albany. I'd wake up at 5 o'clock, drive up, do my heart surgery, come back at 5 o'clock. It wasn't easy, but again, it was what we did, and I give a lot of credit to Wendy. We made it work. The weekends she wasn't on, she'd be up there, and she'd bring Catherine up, and we'd spend weekends up there. That worked out for a while until the transplant program up there never really got going again. But while I was up there, I sort of became much more of a heart surgeon. So I started doing a lot of the routine stuff, which was bypass surgery and valve surgery, and I got pretty good at that. But sure enough, when the transplant program didn't really get off the ground, I was still doing a lot of heart surgery. I got called into the office and they said, well, you know, we don't need transplant anymore, and blah, blah, blah. So I was on the street again. So then for about 6 months, I was deciding to do something else with my life. I met with Paul. I was going to try to help him do, you know, I was thinking maybe I'll just change my career, you know, I mean, maybe I could do something else for the rest. And I went around, I tried doing some few new things and realized, you know, the only thing I do well is heart surgery. Surprisingly enough, I got called to do some locums, which is, you know, temporary covering of heart surgery. And Pocono Medical Center had just opened up a heart surgery program. And they asked me if I could come up and cover for 3 months. I did that. The surgeon who was there had to do something for 3 months. And I liked the center, you know, for about 6 months to 8 months, I was covering a lot. 10 days a month, I'd go up there, the other surgeon. And without getting too political about it, he had a story. He had a very good story. I fell for his story. I loved his story. He grew up in a tribe in Africa and came over when he was 14 years old. He, according to him, got on a plane and got money together, ended up in an airport at JFK, didn't know what he was doing because he had gotten into a school. He went to that school, which was somewhere in Maryland, got lost. Somebody took him under his wing. He ended up getting finally a degree, at that school, graduated when he was 18 or 19, and then got a medical degree and became a heart surgeon. I mean, it was a pretty incredible story. I don't know how much of it was true, though. But that's here nor there. He had me crying, so that's not too hard to do. He also had and still has some missions in Africa. He goes back and he spends time there. It was a very good story. But 6 months later, he calls me up and he says he's changing his careers, he doesn't want to do whatever. And same thing for the hospital. The Poconos were very impressed. You know, he really did get the program off the ground. They had a very good start. There were a lot of doing it. But really, the year him and me were working together, we had some incredible sort of PR, consumer reports for a little hospital, rated us very well. And make a long story short, overnight he walked out of the hospital, told the hospital he's leaving, didn't tell anybody anything, didn't even tell me really, he just walked out the door. The hospital like is in total chaos, you know, and again, they had hired a young heart surgeon who had just finished graduating from his heart surgery program. And they'd come running to me and they say, could you talk this young guy into coming, you know, we don't know what we're going to do. And so I sort of looked at him and said, who am I? And they said, oh, yeah, you could maybe do this? So quickly we created a good partnership. And I thought I was going to retire there. I really did. I spent 3 years to build what I thought was the most successful little program. I've always been good at team building. My team loved me. It was, even though it was a small hospital and I was a single surgeon, I felt it was the 3 years of my most successful heart surgery I ever had. I mean, we had a team, everybody was happy, the patients, we just really were doing incredibly well. All my staff loved me, I love my staff, and that's partly because I always believe that every role is equal. You know, I never look at anybody as a leader or whatever. We're all part of this machine, and everybody, I thank the person cleaning the room, and it works. If you treat your people right, they work well. And we were really moving along in November, again, during the summer, corporate change. The CEO gets fired, board gets a new board member, everything changes all of a sudden. And here we are. In November, the new CEO announced to the whole medical staff how great heart surgery, how great Dr. Fuzeshi is doing. The statistics have been unbelievable. We have one of the best heart programs in the area, blah, blah, blah. To my surprise, 2 weeks later, they fire me. It's like, what's going on here? Well, they decided to bring back the story surgeon who had gone to Philadelphia for my 3 years and essentially run a program into the ground. I mean, they closed the program. In Philadelphia, name was trashed, but for whatever reason, they liked his story better than my story. And the chairman of the board wanted his story back, and they brought him back, and they fired me. So I'm not no sour grapes. My life's been great. And I had a great 3 years at Poconos, and I love my staff, but I'm just trying to say that I'm now part of this culture, which isn't always fair, which isn't always right, and maybe my story got me where, for good reason or bad reason, but now, you know, I'm living in the reality of this country, which has opened up a lot of doors for me, but also I had to live through all the things that everybody lives through, day in and day out. They have to go to work, they have to be treated fairly or unfairly. So now where we stand is, again, almost, I had a pretty good severance package, which is again a United, you know. So for 3 months I was looking around. I tried again to get back into this community. I really did. I wanted to work here. I went back to all the heart programs here, and now I'm older. I'm, you know, probably too good, and I really couldn't again find it. I'm 60 years old now, and this is the first time of all my life I was actually recruited to a program. So up in Utica, they were a poor community. They had a heart surgery program that was doing okay, but they were just the team was completely devastated. The surgeons were screamers and yellers, and the whole hospital was just really desperate for, you know, their program was falling apart because of leadership reasons, and so they recruited me up there to sort of try to, and that's what I'm sort of good at. I'm a good team builder. I'm okay surgeon too. I don't want but again, Wendy and me had to sit down. Do we do it again? I can't commute 4 hours. Our girls are now grown up. Both of my girls went to Hamilton College, which is essentially 5 minutes from Utica. Catherine is still up there, so for 2 years. And we made the decision we'll throw the dice one more time, and we're not going to move yet. And that's why I'm listed as being up in Utica. I've been up there for 3 months. It's been actually a very rewarding experience. I mean, in 3 months, we've done everything we wanted to. The team is now happy. You know, I fixed all the problems where we've got a new team of surgeons, and I think we're getting everything accomplished that we want. And actually, it's been, as far as, again, a very rewarding experience, because I was able to go in there and sort of do the kind of things I wanted to do. And the community really sort of needed it, because it's a poor community. The state of New York put some money towards it. They're thinking of building a new hospital. But it's been a very, very rewarding 3 months so far. But again, not easy. I mean, we're not together. During the week, we're back and forth. But again, I still consider this my community. This is where I grew up. This is where my kids got confirmed. As much as my story brought me to some places and opened some doors, it didn't, you know, I still have to live my life. And at this point, I don't like telling the story anymore. I mean, I was sort of back and forth whether I even wanted to do this, because at this point, it really is more about my kids, and, you know, that's where, you know, our family. But I figured I could tell it one more time. And that's sort of my conclusion. But again, I think it's timely in the sense that our country at this point is really at a crossroads, and I really, really hope that all the principles that it was built on, you know, again, I hope we don't build too many walls to keep people out. Thanks.
Laszlo talks about stories and his story and how his story helped, but his story still has to fit in with what's happening around. What questions do you have of Laszlo? Bob?
Well, I just wanted, I went to Rutgers in New Brunswick, which has a large Hungarian population, but I had been out to see the remains of Camp Kilmer, the army base. So what I was always told was that, I was at Rutgers in the 60s, that with the '56 revolution, the refugees were coming over, and they actually housed them at the army base at Camp Kilmer.
Absolutely. Now, we were lucky again. We only stayed there a week, and then we were already out in Ohio.
So you were at Camp Kilmer?
Yeah, that's where we came in first. We came to Camp Kilmer. That's where we landed. But within a week, we were in Dayton, Ohio. You know, churches, which is true of a lot of refugees even today, churches will take, you know, groups of them. So we went to Hungarian church in Dayton, Ohio, where we were sort of taken in and helped us get off the ground.
And they also
again, this is just stories told to me, because I was only one.
Right. But before I left New Brunswick, I lived there for a number of years after graduating.
Yeah.
They named a street after Cardinal Mindszenty, right? Which, I mean, in terms of respect or acceptance, to me, it said something.
Yeah, I mean, well, even up in Utica, there were a lot of Polish immigrants, and there's, we were going through it. You know, again, that era, as is the era before that, the Irish immigrants, and I mean, those are all looked up as positive. These are things that people build memorials to. It's just, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's, many of these communities were built, I mean, our house was built by Hungarians. When we bought our house, we looked in there, and there was this motif of tulips on on the handrail. I said, that's so Hungarian. And we go back historically that many of the houses built